Hello BookTube, hello friends, welcome to Lizzie Faye Loves Books. I'm Elizabeth, and in this video I'd like to take a look back at my reading year of 2018. Now, I have really enjoyed watching several people do their stats and their totals and everything. I love watching that. I'm not good at doing that. So this will be a very abbreviated version of my statistics for what I read in 2018, and I want to include my top 10 or 12 books that I read during the year. Now, I should really clarify by saying these are probably not my absolute top 10 books, but some of them are in my top 5, and then I tried to pick my top books in a few different categories just to sort of give you a wide look at my reading year. So let's get started. So let me tell you my totals for the year. I finished a total of 255 books for the year 2018. On my Goodreads page, it shows 256 because I did have one DNF that I read 80 pages out of 250. So I marked it as read, gave it 1 star, and called it quits, but I did not actually finish it. So of the 256 books, 159 of them I listened to on audio, and 97 of them I read in print. I neglected to add up how many of those 97 were children's books, but there were several that were children's picture books and children's chapter books that wouldn't even be considered middle grade. They would be for a younger audience. So I will look that up later, and I will type up some totals down below, and if you're interested, then you can check that out. Also, I neglected to add up how many of the books I read were big books. I was keeping a list of how many books over 400 pages that I had read, and I realize now that I didn't go back and actually finish that list. I know that I read at least 20 books that were over 400 pages, so I think there were probably a few more than that, and I just didn't get that done before I turned on the camera. Sorry. So I mostly wanted to focus in this video today on the books that were my favorites. I did have a couple of disappointments, and interestingly enough, the month of April was a very interesting in my reading year. I had 2 of my top 5, top 10 books that I read in the month of April, and then 2 of my most disappointing books that I rated 2 stars in the month of April. And then in addition to that, not even included in those totals, Sarah and I from Steeped in Books hosted a readathon called Amish in April, and I ended up reading quite a few Amish books during the month of April as well. So the month of April was all over the place. So one of the books that I read in April, which is the one that probably resonated the most with me and is the most memorable. If you ask me what is your favorite book of 2018, this is the first one that comes to mind, and that is The Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Now, I listened to this on audio, which is why I am pronouncing it Moscow instead of Moscow as I used to do, because in the audiobook the narrator pronounces it Moscow, and so that's what I'm going with. Now, when I try to describe this book to people and tell them how much I loved it, it's really difficult because it simply is about a man who is under house arrest living in a hotel in Russia, and the story is about all of the things that happen to him, all of the people that he knows in the hotel, and he goes throughout his life from about age 30 until I don't even know what age, and he is living in that hotel and is not allowed to leave. So that alone doesn't make it sound that engaging. In fact, it almost sounds kind of boring, but it is not. It is a fantastic book. I absolutely loved it. It's very character driven, but there are a lot of things that do happen in the book, and I just thought it was wonderful. So if you enjoy historical fiction, I recommend that you pick up this book, and I loved it. The other book that I read in April that I knew was going to be one of my top books for the year was The Angels of Morgan Hill by Donna VanLiere. Now, this is one of Donna VanLiere's older books. In fact, it had a lot of similarities and similar plot points to The Good Dream, and I would say between the two I probably liked The Good Dream better, but I didn't read The Good Dream in 2018. I read it in 2017. Each of them has basically a thrown away child who needs love, needs a family, and then there are people in the community that don't agree with the choices made by the people who are taking care of these children, that type of thing. That's where the similarities are. And interestingly enough, they take place in the same town. So this one is an older book, and it almost feels like if she took this book and then a few years later made it better. And I don't know, it's interesting, the parallels, but I love them both, and I would recommend them both. But this one I read in 2018, so it makes the list. Two other literary historical fiction books that really resonated with me this past year were books that I read for book club. One of them was the sequel to The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grissom. I don't have a copy of Glory Over Everything, but I will put one here in the video. This was a sequel to The Kitchen House, but it was set far enough apart from The Kitchen House that I think you could read one without having read the other. However, I think you will like Glory Over Everything so much that you will wish that you hadn't spoiled The Kitchen House by reading it first. So for those reasons, I would definitely read The Kitchen House first and then read Glory Over Everything, but definitely know that it is a fantastic sequel, very, very compelling, just heartbreaking, and I definitely think that if you enjoy reading books between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War set in the U.S., that both The Kitchen House and Glory Over Everything are books that you must read. So another book that I read for book club that is historical fiction that I thought was fantastic is Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark T. Sullivan. This book was wonderful. It was so compelling, so engaging, and I read that it is based on a real person. I am assuming that some parts of it are embellished, but for the most part, this story is based on a real life person who in his younger years helped Jews to escape from the Nazis, and then later when his parents signed him up for the Nazi army, he became the driver for a general. There's just so many aspects to this book. It's just such a great book, and I highly recommend that you check it out. Now, another book that I would give honorable mention to is a book that I read for a read-along early in the year, and that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I thoroughly love this book, and I haven't read a lot of westerns in my life. Although I did grow up on a cattle ranch in rural Oklahoma, I don't read a lot from that genre, but I highly recommend this book. It was just a fantastic read. I do have plans to read the rest of the books in the series. So after reading Lonesome Dove, that led me to a memoir by Larry McMurtry called Books, and I would say that that is definitely on my list as well. It is probably my favorite memoir that I read this year. I love to talk about books, and I could talk books with anyone, and despite the fact that I'm a part of BookTube, I sometimes feel like I'm alone in that. I just feel like there's no one as nerdy about books as I am, and yet I really know deep down that I'm not even the nerdiest. There are a lot more people out there that know more about books than I do, are in touch with more books than I am, and so I don't know why I think that. But I felt a kindred spirit in Larry McMurtry. He was a bookseller and a writer and loved to read books, and this whole memoir is about his relationship with books from his young life all the way through. So it's just such a fantastic book, and I really enjoyed it. Now, that being said, I had another memoir that I really enjoyed, and it was by one of my favorite authors who I've already mentioned. It was called Finding Grace by Donna VanLiere, and I don't have a physical copy of it, but I listened to it on Hoopla, and it is a beautiful story about her life. And from reading that, I can now have a bit more understanding about where she draws her material from to write her fiction books. She writes books from the heart, and they're so touching and beautiful, and I really enjoyed her memoir. So those two would be top as far as memoirs go. Now, I have another nonfiction book that I guess is a memoir of sorts, but it's really animal related, so I have to talk about this one as well. I read this early in the year, and I buddy read it with Amber Eats Books, and we both enjoyed it. It's called Kitty Cornered by Bob Tart. It's a wonderful book about animals, and one of the things that makes this book so amazing is not only the funny and humorous way that it's told. I am very happy to tell you that No cats had to die in the making of this book. And I know that that is what prevents a lot of you animal lovers from reading books about animals, because invariably there'll be a great book and then the dog dies or the cat dies. And no, there's no one that dies in this book, and it's fantastic. I highly recommend it for all of you cat lovers out there. I read quite a few middle grade books in the year 2018, and I think the one that stands out to me the most of all that I read is the book Short by Holly Goldberg Sloan. I had previously read Counting by Sevens by the same author and loved it, and I think her book Short tops Counting by Sevens. It was absolutely fantastic. It is about a young girl who gets a part as a munchkin in a summer production of The Wizard of Oz. It's kind of a coming of age story in a way, but it's told so innocently and so beautifully, and I recommend this one in print. I actually read it twice. I listened to it on audio and then I went back and read it in print just to make sure I didn't miss any of the fantastic dialogue and the inner monologue of the main character. It's told from her perspective, and it's just wonderful. I highly recommend that you pick it up. If you love middle grade books, or even if you don't, try this one because it's fantastic. I did a video not too long ago about one of my favorite authors, Jan Karon, who writes my absolute favorite series of all time, the Midford Series. And I have to mention this book as one of my top books for the year because it came out in 2017 and I read it early in 2018. It is the most recent book in the series, called To Be Where You Are. Now, this is not necessarily my favorite book of the series, but this is the only one that I read in 2018, so therefore it has to make the list. This was absolutely wonderful. It was melancholy, there was some sadness, but I loved visiting the characters again and the town. It was like coming home again. And then at the end of 2018, I was reading Christmas books. So the one that stood out to me the most, and I wanted to include it on this list, is A Quilt for Christmas by Sandra Dallas. I listened to this on audio and I thought it was wonderful. It is mainly about a family in Kansas and her surrounding neighbors and community who are at home during the Civil War, and they all have family and loved ones who are in the war, and they are basically surviving all that entails while their loved ones are at war. And it was a fantastic book. I absolutely loved it. I was a little unsure going into it because I had been running about 50-50 with the Sandra Dallas books that I had read. Two of her books I had read that I really loved, two that I didn't particularly enjoy. So this book tipped the scales for sure, and I would recommend it. If you enjoy Civil War era fiction and you are looking for something to read next Christmas season, then I recommend picking this up. In fact, I don't even think you have to wait till Christmas. This is just a really good historical fiction book that you could read at any time during the year. So I don't like to talk too much about star ratings and all of that because I basically base my ratings on my emotional response to a book. But if you're curious, I will let you know that of the 256 books that I read, there were 64 of them that I rated 5 stars, and those do include some children's books. I like to rate children's books and picture books right along with all the other books that I'm reading. So 150 of the books out of the 256 I rated 4 stars. So that's the bulk of what I read. And then 35 of the books that I read were 3-star books, and only 6 of them were 2-star books. I'm happy about that because that means that I mostly read books that I enjoyed. And then one of the books I rated 1 star, and that was the book that I DNF'd. I will be unhauling this. This is Big 5-0 by Bill Geist. And if you want to see what I thought about it, just go back to my November wrap-up or to my TBR jar wrap-up where I talked a little bit more about it. And if you're curious about any of my other disappointing reads for the year, you can certainly look up my Goodreads page. 2 of the others that come to mind were 2 that I read in April, and I already mentioned how April was such a polarizing month. And the 2 that I read in April that I did not enjoy were The Buccaneers by Edith Wharton, and I read that because it was for book club, and I was in agreement with most of the other book club members. We didn't feel like that the book was very enjoyable at all, and sort of lamented that we didn't pick one of her more popular books like Age of Innocence or something like that. But the interesting thing about it is that she was writing that book when she passed away, and so the audio version that I got ended where she ended. But there is a version that has been finished by another author. And so I picked that print book up from the library, and I went ahead and read those last 100 pages or so. I thought those were the best pages in the book, and several of the other book club members who read those agreed. So, you know, it was just one of those things that in hindsight we could have picked something better for book club, but you know, you live and learn. The other one that was a disappointment to me that I read in April was Your Oasis on Flame Lake by Lorna Landvik. Now, Lorna Landvik was one of my original authors that I had collected more than 4 of her books that I hadn't read, and since then I have listened to 2 of her books on audio that were abridged, and then I read her Christmas book, 'Tis the Season, in print. And I started picking her books up because my sister really recommended a book called Oh My Stars by her, and I still have not read that one yet. But I really want to love her as an author. Several of her books are on my shelves and they look fantastic. And I decided to go ahead and listen to the abridged version of this book because that was what I had access to. And I thought, well, this will kind of give me some insight into the book, and I could see if it's something that I want to read the full version of. But the themes of it had to do with marital infidelity and just other themes that were not something that I enjoy reading about. So I decided to unhaul my print copy of that book. I still have the other Lorna Landvik books on the shelf that I haven't read, and I will definitely read Oh My Stars, and hopefully I will enjoy it more. However, Your Oasis on Flame Lake was just not a book for me. So that kind of sums up my reading year of 2018. Overall, I had a fantastic reading year with 65 5-star books and 150 4-star books. I really enjoyed the majority of the books that I read, and I am happy about how 2019 has started out. Now, I have been working on a project called my 20 by 20 reading challenge, which is basically a stack the series challenge where I have 20 stacks, and I will do a separate video about how I did on those stacks so far this year and talk about how I've tweaked them for 2019. I have basically given myself 3 years to do all 20 stacks, so I hope to be done with that challenge by the end of 2020. So that's all I have for this video. I hope you're having a great day, read a good book, and God bless you.